Virginian than in the last few weeks, as we've really done what I think is a really excellent job of dealing with COVID-19. So, so though COVID-19 is really on everyone's mind, in many ways, our current emergency that we're having, a public health emergency, is really instructive, I think, for understanding how society has so far and how it might in the future respond to the many emergencies associated with climate change. And so tonight we have several guests who will help us navigate and learn from what we can from the current experience and talk about what are some of the bold actions we can take in West Virginia to try to solve climate change by 2030. So our first guest is Professor of Law, James Van Nostrand, and he's going to be talking to us tonight about sort of the energy and legal landscape around energy in the state. So it'll just take me a moment to find him among the many participants. Here we go. Sorry, I'm having a little bit of a technical difficulty there, getting him unmuted. But I think we've got him.
All right.
Unmuted, yeah.
Can you drop your screen sharing, Amy?
I can.
There we go. All right. They asked me to put together some ideas for this Power Dialogues nationwide, things we can do in West Virginia between now and 2030. So the title says to solve climate change. I think that's a little ambitious, but that's the title of the program, so I'm going to go with that. So I want to start off just by identifying the problem in terms of the energy policies that basically we're missing out on the clean energy revolution, that we have failed over the last decade to diversify our electricity supply, to move more to an all of the above energy strategy. As a result, we're suffering from rapidly increasing electricity costs and high utility bills. The fact that we've doubled down on coal over the last decade. Our electricity prices have risen in West Virginia faster than any other state in the country over the last 10 years. We've increased at a rate of 4 times the national average. And a lot of that is because other states are diversifying. They're taking advantage of low-cost natural gas. They're taking advantage of renewables, and they're lowering their electricity costs. And ours are rapidly going up because we have not diversified away from coal. The other thing that the problem is we're missing out on the jobs in the clean energy sector. There's all the new jobs that are happening now are basically in the clean energy sector, energy efficiency, wind and solar. And we don't have any policies in place in our state that are going to attract those jobs. And lots of states, got a slide later on, they'll show you a lot of the states around us in terms of capturing the solar growth. They're taking advantage of it. And I think Evan Hansen will talk about this a little bit more, but we have an inability to attract jobs that are offered by large employers. Most large employers in the country now have pretty aggressive corporate renewable energy goals, and they want to be able to supply their data centers with renewable electricity, or their corporate offices with 100% clean energy. And what we offer in West Virginia is 92% coal-fired electricity, and that doesn't attract many employers. And you couple that with the fact that our electricity rates have gone up 4 times the national average over the last 10 years. It's not a very attractive place for anybody to want to come and do business. So I thought about 3 policies in West Virginia that could make a difference by 2030. The political feasibility is one thing, but if I were to pick the things that I think would make most difference, these are the 3 that I would point to. I think Evan Hansen might have some other ideas and others, but so starting off with renewable portfolio or clean energy standard, allowing third-party ownership of solar panels, and adopting energy efficiency resource standard. So basically, renewable portfolio standard is, and we can see 29 states plus District of Columbia have a renewable portfolio standard. It requires the electric utilities in the state to procure a certain percentage of the electricity supply from renewable sources. They've been pretty much around for 15 or 20 years now. Most of the states are revisiting their current renewable portfolio standards and making them more aggressive. New York, for example, has gone from 50% to 70% renewable energy. California's gone to 60%. West Virginia did have an alternative renewable energy portfolio standard that was repealed as one of the first acts of the 2015 legislative session. So right now, we don't really have anything to the renewable energy developers to say, come to West Virginia, because we have policies that will require utilities to buy the output from your projects. We don't require utilities to buy renewable power at all. It might make sense in terms of their electricity portfolios, but we don't have any policies, unlike the vast majority of states in the country, that encourage their utilities to procure their electricity supplies from renewable sources. And there's also clean energy standards, where we look at the number of states that have gone to virtually carbon-free. New York, for example, is carbon-free by 2045. California is 100% carbon-free by 2045. So that also puts nuclear energy into play. So it's not just renewables, but it's nuclear. So I'm indifferent. If we want to do a carbon-free, a low-carbon energy standard, that would be fine too. But we need to have some policies in place that say we're open for business to attract renewable energy developers. Another measure that I think would make a big difference is third-party solar PV power purchase agreements in the United States. There are a couple of efforts in the last couple of legislative sessions by West Virginia Solar United Neighbors and West Virginians for Energy Freedom, a couple of bills that have run that haven't gotten much traction, but basically it would allow people, other than if you don't have to own your own solar panels, basically you can enter into a third-party arrangement with a developer who will install the solar panels on your roof, and it basically opens up the market significantly. We can see at least 28 states allow power purchase agreements. Advantages: you avoid that large upfront investment by homes and businesses that basically, if you're looking to spend $20,000 or $30,000 to put a solar array on your roof, most people don't have that kind of money. This basically allows a developer to come in, put the panels on your roof, and then you pay back, or you basically compensate for those panels through the electricity that's generated by them, which also is used to reduce your electricity costs. Another big advantage is there's currently a significant investment tax credit from the federal government. And if you're a local government or you're a nonprofit, you can't take advantage of that investment tax credit. So we leave a lot of money on the table. And by using power purchase agreements, you can actually have a third-party developer who'd be able to take advantage of those tax credits. And that reduces the cost of solar production for everyone. And particularly in West Virginia, when you look at the rise in electricity prices that we've experienced the last 10 years, it would provide a hedge. If you have your own solar panels, you're going to have at least a portion, probably a pretty large portion of electricity supply provided by solar panels. And so you're not going to be quite so upset about those increasing rates that you're getting from Appalachian Power and Mon Power every month. One of the points, and this is from the West Virginians for Energy Freedom. So you look at, compared to surrounding states, and one of the reasons I wanted to focus on renewable portfolio standards and the availability of third-party ownership of solar panels is this chart pretty much shows the surrounding states: Ohio, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia, and Kentucky. So what do Kentucky and West Virginia have in common? Neither one of us has a renewable portfolio standard, and neither one of us allows power purchase agreements. You can see West Virginia, we have 8 megawatts of installed solar capacity and only 341 solar jobs. And you compare that to a state like Pennsylvania, which allows power purchase agreements to have a renewable portfolio standard. They have 4,219 solar jobs and installed solar capacity of 420 megawatts. Same thing with Virginia, which is ramping up their program considerably now, but they've got 3,890 solar jobs and 731 megawatts of electricity generated by solar. And so those two policy initiatives, coupling of an RPS that says to utilities, we want you to procure a certain percentage of electricity supply from solar, and allowing residential and commercial customers to take advantage of power purchase agreements, you're going to get a lot more solar generation. You're going to diversify the energy supply, and you're going to create solar jobs because you're going to attract the solar installers for one thing, but also potentially to attract solar manufacturers as well. The other piece I wanted to focus on was energy efficiency. Why energy efficiency? One is the cheapest way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. If we're going to really take on climate change, we need to achieve substantial reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. And the lowest cost way to do that is through energy efficiency programs. In other words, having the utilities ramp up programs where they pay consumers to install energy efficiency measures, whether that be Energy Star appliances, whether that be insulation in your roof, whether that be better thermal insulation, doors, windows, all those things. Most utilities around the country have pretty aggressive energy efficiency programs that actually compensate customers for installing these measures to reduce their electricity bills. We have a truly dreadful set of energy efficiency programs in West Virginia. Basically, well, for one thing, I'll show you in a minute, but the American Council for Energy Efficient Economy basically ranks all the states through the state scorecard. Here's the ACEEE 2019 state scorecard rankings. And once again, West Virginia is bringing up the rear at number 48, because basically our utilities don't have much in the way of energy efficiency programs. The portion of their budgets that they spend on energy efficiency programs is very small. And so we have rates that are below the national average, but our bills are above the national average. Why? Because we waste a lot of energy. We've not invested in energy efficiency. And ramping up energy efficiency would give utility customers, provide them with the tools to control their energy costs, which is more and more important given our electricity rates are growing up as rapidly as they have been. So one way we can do that is through adopting an energy efficiency resource standard, much like a renewable portfolio standard. It's basically a policy measure by the state that says we want our utilities to ramp up their energy efficiency programs to achieve a certain level of savings, whether that's 15% by 2025, whether it's 1% annually or 2% annually, but you're basically articulating a policy goal to achieve certain reductions through energy efficiency. And then you're going to have the utilities are going to have to ramp up their energy efficiency programs to achieve those goals. And it's particularly frustrating in West Virginia, where we're served by First Energy and American Electric Power and all the surrounding states that require energy efficiency programs. And you look at Ohio and you look at Pennsylvania in particular, because both those utilities operate in those states. You go on the websites of the First Energy and AEP affiliates that operate in those states and look at the vast array of energy efficiency programs that those customers in those states get to benefit from. We don't have that in West Virginia because our Public Service Commission does not require utilities to invest in energy efficiency. There's no institutional support for it, and it would be huge in the way of addressing climate change, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and giving customers the tools that they need to control their energy costs. So those are the three primary policies that I could point to as making a big difference if we could enact that between now and 2030. And with that, I'll pass the baton off and look forward to questions following the presentations.
Okay, thank you so much, Jamie. Why don't we move on to Evan Hansen, and at the end we can take questions for all the speakers. So I have to find each speaker in the long list of participants. So I'm going to unmute Evan, and he should be able to take the screen share over.
Okay, how's the sound?
Great.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me. My name's Evan Hansen. I am a delegate in the West Virginia House of Delegates, and I represent Monongalia County, including the city of Morgantown. And I've been there for 2 years so far. This is my first term. And it's difficult to deal with some of these issues in West Virginia at the state level. It's difficult because there's been a history of catering to the coal industry and ignoring environmental issues. But there is some hope. I wanted to describe a bill that passed just a few months ago in the 2020 session related to solar. And then after that, give an example of an action that local governments can take in West Virginia to help address climate change. But at the state level, we passed a bill. It was Senate Bill 583, and once it's fully implemented, it's going to drastically increase the amount of solar across West Virginia. There's about 10 megawatts of solar in West Virginia now, and what this bill would do is allow the construction of 400 megawatts of additional solar And the solar would be developed by the two major utilities in West Virginia, 200 megawatts each. And they'll do it in 50 megawatt increments over the next several years, assuming that they have the demand for it. This was a bill that I co-sponsored, but it was a bipartisan bill, and it had support of the leadership in the House and the Senate, and also in the governor's office. And the reason why it had such broad support is because we're missing out on solar-related jobs in West Virginia, like Professor Van Nostrand mentioned a few minutes ago. And in the past, we had been talking about that, but we were able to get that on the public record. We had the Secretary of Commerce who testified in the Energy Committee. I apologize for the train going by. I think it's a coal train. But the Secretary of Commerce testified in committee that when they take calls frequently from companies that are considering siting in West Virginia. And one of the first questions that many of these companies ask is whether West Virginia has access to renewable electricity and solar electricity. And he's had to tell them no, that there's some limited avenues to get solar, but you're not going to be able to get the amount of electricity that you may need based on your corporate renewable energy target. But now we do have access to that amount of solar. So this is a solar jobs bill. It hopefully will allow us to attract more companies into the state that need access to solar to meet their renewable electricity targets. And it'll also lead to some solar installation jobs. And I think it's a good example of a bill that can have broad support when we link up renewable energy development with jobs and with diversifying West Virginia's economy. It may not be the best bill, it may not be the perfect bill, but it gets us a long way toward reaching those goals of starting to address climate change through the large-scale development of renewables and creating jobs. And then the second thing I wanted to mention was something that could be done at the local level. Now, there are building codes that are adopted by the state legislature, and that can be adopted by local communities across West Virginia, and many towns and cities have done so. And one type of building code is called an energy code, and that governs things like lighting and air conditioning and heating and insulation and sealing windows and doors and things like that. So it gets at how efficient or how energy efficient West Virginia's homes and businesses are. And a map that was just shown by Professor Van Nostrand showed that West Virginia is the 48th least energy efficient state across the country. And a large reason why we're so energy inefficient is because our homes and businesses, our built environment is very inefficient. And that means not only are we spending extra money and wasting this money on energy that's not really doing us any good, but it's bad for the environment. It's bad for climate change because it means we're burning more fuel and creating more carbon dioxide. So one thing you can do is make sure that your local government has adopted the most recent energy codes for both residential and commercial buildings. And the last thing I wanted to talk about was just who to contact. You know, at the state level, at the legislature, there's 100 delegates and there's 34 senators. And I don't think they hear all that much from people that are that concerned about climate change, especially from their own districts. And so one thing that I think would be very important in terms of impacting the debate down there is to contact your delegates and senators and let them know that you are concerned about climate change and why you're concerned about it, and to make some concrete suggestions about what you think could be done, you know, what you think the solution could look like in West Virginia. And I think it's important to recognize the difficulty, the challenges of addressing climate change in West Virginia, because our electric system is so dependent on coal, and because coal has been such a part of our history and the heritage of West Virginia. So many legislators are tied to the coal industry in one way or another. They may have worked there themselves, or virtually everyone's probably had family members who've worked in the coal industry. So we need to be sensitive to those issues and recognize that all that is very real. But that doesn't mean that we should let these new energy jobs pass us by and pass up these opportunities to diversify our economy so that we have jobs for the children and for the grandchildren of the coal miners, because the number of coal jobs is going to decrease in the future. And then the last thing, another thing you can do is once the utilities actually build these large-scale solar arrays, they're going to offer a new tariff, a new solar tariff, and they're going to offer it to their industrial customers and their commercial customers, but also to their residential customers. And while it's really going to be driven by the large industrial customers, you're going to have an opportunity to make a choice and sign on to those new solar tariffs and get your electricity from 100% renewable sources. So I would suggest you do that too. So that's all I have right now, but I'll be around to take questions once all the presentations are done.
Thank you so much, Delegate Evan Hansen. All right, our next speaker is Dr. Robert Duval. He's an associate professor of public health at WVU.
Thank you very much. I'm really glad to be here. Thanks to Bart and thanks to Sandra and Amy and everyone else who put this together. It's quite good. It certainly distracts us at the moment from the more current problems we have in the world. So, I come to climate change by way of political science. I taught environmental policy and national security policy for years, and then I moved to public health. And I taught my first class in climate change 30 years ago. And with one of your colleagues, Amy, Steve Kite, actually two, Steve Kite and Bob Bailing, we put together a team class on it. And so I've been looking at this and teaching it for a long time. Now, I'm not here to give you solutions. I mean, I'm doing a public health thing here, and public health doesn't have the solutions you need. Professor Nostrand and Delegate Hansen are the people you should listen to about how to fix things, or among others. I'm here to give you lots of reasons why. And so I'm going to talk about the public health consequences. And I unfortunately do not have this oriented as much to West Virginia as I should have, but at least I'll kick off with, this is the flood back in, what, 2016? This is Richfield.
Sorry to interrupt you, Robert, but
yeah.
Can you hit the share screen?
Oh, I'm sorry. Thanks for doing that. I thought I did. I'll hit the shared screen first. And it's got to be that. That work better?
I feel like we're looking at.
You're looking at the whole. I'm not back on slideshow.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, do you see the flood at
yes.
Richfield?
Perfect.
Okay. Floods are a natural consequence of extreme precipitation events from climate change. This was a rather big one in West Virginia. And a lot of public health people are very much involved in emergency management. All the local health departments turn out for these things. And this is a very important aspect of how public health interfaces with climate change. Okay, I'm really happy that this is coming along. I've been teaching this it took 28 years before people started paying a lot of attention to it. So I'm really quite happy with this. And, but as I said, it's not our job in public health to find solutions. It's our job to jump up and down and scream and holler and say, you need solutions. So here I am to talk about that. We have consensus on temperature. I don't need to talk about that. We have consensus on sea level rise. There's a lot that we agree on this. So I'm here to do public health, and these are the things public health people worry about. And I will start with this, which is totally out in left field, but this is the scariest picture I've ever seen. This is the Siberian tundra. The Siberian tundra has been frozen since that mastodon died, and this guy is really happy because it's worth a few $1,000s to him. But you could get no clearer evidence that climate is changing on a global scale than the fact that this guy found this. And they've been finding hundreds of them or thousands. So it was the cover of National Geographic, and it's really quite frightening to me. Okay, a lot of climate change is all about anomalies at first. It used to be that record hot years were anomalies, and that, a coral reef bleached, and that was an anomaly. A Category 5 hurricane was an anomaly. And so these anomalies, it's what I call the march of anomalies. They're anomalies all the way up until they become trends. And there are trends in all of these areas. And then they all tie to public health in one way or another. Coral reef bleaching doesn't sound that related to public health, but we're also concerned with food security, and food chains in the ocean are very much tied to coral reefs. I didn't know I had that. That's the Great Barrier Island. Oh, and Greenland now has market value. That's a big sign of global change. There are lots of direct medical consequences of heat. I do not have a graphic this nice for West Virginia, a heat wave in West Virginia. They didn't produce them back in 88, 89, which would have been the best time. But this was San Francisco in September 1 of 2017, when it reached 106 in San Francisco. If you've been to San Francisco, you know that's not the normal temperature there. I just happened to be there that day, and for someone from Florida, that was among the worst heat I've ever been in. So this applies across to any number of areas. Just one good, for instance, is something called Mesoamerican nephropathy, which is basically agricultural workers out in the field in higher temperatures become dehydrated quicker. And as a result, they risk kidney damage and eventually form kidney stones. And so apparently about at least 20,000 sugarcane workers in El Salvador and Costa Rica have died of Mesoamerican nephropathy. If you look at this map, you can see that it actually makes its way up to West Virginia by about 2050. And we don't have quite as much agriculture, but we have a big timber industry. So and there's a lot of work outside in West Virginia, construction work as well. Oops. Okay, now I mentioned food security. This isn't West Virginia, but it ties to us. With sea level rise, this is the Nile Delta, and it will be flooded. It will be either under the Mediterranean Sea, or the aquifers there will be saltwater intrusion into most of the aquifers there and the drainage from the Nile. 60% of Egypt's agricultural production is in that green shaded area, and most of it will be gone. Egypt has a population of 100 million people. They're going to need to get food somewhere, and therefore nations like Egypt that suffer this will be looking for food. Food prices will go up. Food price availability will decrease. And so this will come to haunt us, or come to affect us at our dinner table right here in West Virginia. And this is only one example. Migration will end up being a large problem. President Trump is not the only world leader who likes walls. This is the wall between India and Bangladesh. And they built a 2,500-mile wall there because they believe that when Bangladesh floods, and it will, a lot of Bangladeshis will want to be coming over to India at that time. So they've built their own wall. It doesn't get a lot of press these days. So. Now, let's get a little closer to home. A big area in public health are emerging and zoonotic diseases. Ebola in 2014 was, they believe it was spread by a bat. It was in West Africa. Lyme disease has been spreading substantially. It's a little harder to predict exactly where it's going. I understand that this map underrepresents West Virginia, but I heard that from the regional epidemiologist here. So, now, I said Ebola started in West Africa. That's rather interesting because that's out of its normal territory. Normally it's in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And so it was a mislocation. Now, if you're not aware of it, the little fellow on the left is the primary predator of human beings. It's the Aedes aegypti mosquito, which spreads Zika, dengue, and chikungunya and yellow fever. I think not West Nile, nor does it spread malaria. And all these diseases are spread. When you change their habitat with temperature, you are changing their range. They're going to move. When they move, they take their diseases with them. They may even pick up some new ones on the way. And so the whole topic of zoonotic diseases is a really big one for climate change because we're going to see a lot of it. If you don't think we've seen a lot, well, HIV came from chimpanzees. H1N1 in 2009 was from swine. Ebola in 2014 was bats. The more recent one in Democratic Republic of Congo is also believed to be from bats. Zika came close to us. It's came close to being a pandemic. It's from mosquitoes. SARS, bats, and by way of civet cats, apparently. And MERS spread by camels. Well, today we have COVID-19. Where did COVID-19 come from? Appears to have come from bats. I'm not going to make a strong case to say COVID-19 is caused by climate change, but I will tell you it's an anomaly that is very consistent with climate change. When you disrupt ecosystems, the animals, the plants, to a lesser degree, and bacteria, viruses, they all migrate. They all move around. They reassort themselves. And so COVID-19 is very much an anomaly that's consistent with climate change. And at a minimum, you have to look at these pandemics as population issues, because part of the reason COVID-19 is spreading so much is because of the growth in population and the mobility of the modern population. COVID-19 would probably not be anywhere near a problem if we lived in a world with only 700 million people instead of 7 billion. However, in a world of 700 million, climate change wouldn't be a problem either. Climate change is ultimately a population problem, but you can't regulate population growth. China tried, it wasn't very successful. So keep that in mind. And China will adapt its practices. This fellow is a food vendor in a Chinese market, and that's where he sleeps. Okay, we have fewer birds today, but we have more ticks. That's my shock slide for the presentation. It often gets talked about, we have major extinctions going on. We are in the Holocene extinction. It seems to be one of the most rapid in the geological record that they can find. This little fellow was the first creature that they attribute death by climate change. And the passenger pigeon is also, that was wiped out by humans. And if you don't think humans are capable of wiping out major species, we nearly did it to the buffalo. Bison went from being 60 million in the US to only 858 in the 1880s, 1890s. And this fellow understands what's happening. It's a lemur from Madagascar. I said we do a lot of emergency management, emergency response. Hurricanes have become tremendously more powerful. They certainly intensify greater in 24 hours of late in recent years. And that's a rather statistically significant trend. And a lot of public health people end up going out and trying to get people to move off the barrier islands. I usually try and explain storm surge by showing this picture. This was Galveston Island in 2008. By the way, infrastructure, when it comes up, is also a public health issue because of the failure of dams and structures. You know, the fourth largest loss of life due to a dam failure in the US was the Buffalo Creek Dam back in the, I can't remember when it was. I want to say the early 70s, but I'm not quite sure on that. But infrastructure is a real problem, and this particular piece of infrastructure always worries me the most every flood season on the Mississippi River, because this is what keeps how they keep New Orleans from flooding by diverting into the Atchafalaya River Basin. And it almost failed in 2011. And oh good, it didn't play. If it fails, it will close the port of New Orleans, which is the largest cargo port in the United States. Oh, sorry about that. There's a reason why that slide plays Led Zeppelin. And I can answer that in the questions. There are lots more. Clean water, obviously, wildfires. We don't have many in West Virginia now. We will during dry season. They will become more common. That's a picture of the recent Australia fires, which were much larger than the California fires. Obviously, mental health issues can come from all of these things. Landslides were a little anecdotal remark I put on there. If you're the Morgantown people, you recognize that as being a Morgantown rock slide early in the semester that sent 3 people to the hospital. I'm teaching climate change this semester. The Tuesday before this rock slide, I talked about landslides in my climate change class. I took the picture from Google Street View of that rock up on the hillside. And I told them, I worry about this every time I drive by there when it's been rainy. 1 week later, this happened. So landslides are a really, really big issue in here. I learned that from Amy's colleague, Steve Kite, who did a lot of research on landslides in the area. And they're very expensive, very difficult to deal with. So framing the debate, when I talk to people about this and they don't really want to do much about energy prices, energy consumption because of the price, and I ask them how they would feel about doubling the cost of gasoline and doubling the cost of electricity. And it frightens people. They just immediately want to back off the topic. They have no interest in doing anything that's going to double the cost of the gasoline or their electricity. And my frame of reference on this is to say, look, you have a choice. You can double your energy cost or you can triple your food costs, because food over the next several decades is going to escalate and be much more difficult to keep producing at the same level without raising its price substantially. And given what's happening with us now with COVID-19, if you want to make that connection, you've got to realize that medical costs are going to go up too. There are lots of areas where we pay. We pay at the grocery store. We pay with our homeowners insurance policy with flooding and storms. Even home construction is dictated by disasters. We pay in the water meter as clean water gets scarcer, and it will, especially with saltwater intrusion in coastal areas. Lots of side medical costs besides COVID-19. And of course, our taxes will go up to pay for all this. The problems are tremendous, and they affect every aspect of our life. West Virginia is actually luckier than a lot of places because it may have less of an effect. So I people tend to want to adopt solutions or say that education is the solution by just saying no, the equivalent of just saying no. We have to change, we have to modify our behavior away from carbon fuels. And just say no as a policy will work no better for climate change than it did for drugs. We make, climate change occurs because of economic decisions. And so we really must address it with economic tools, and taxes are economic tools. They're policy tools as well, and I'm not opposed to them by any means, but essentially as long as energy is cheap, we will keep burning it. Or as long as fossil fuels are cheap, we will keep burning them. I'm certainly quite fond of diversification, but ultimately if it's cheap, it gets consumed. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Duval. So our last speaker is Kathryn Williamson. She's an assistant professor of physics and is engaged in all kinds of public outreach activities with respect to science and climate change.
All right, can you guys hear me okay?
Mhm.
Awesome, wonderful. Great, yeah, very happy to be here. This event is something I just learned about because I'm on the email list for the Solve Climate by 2030 event. And I am one of the founding members of West Virginia Climate Action. And so we rushed to put this together sort of a week ago. And so we're just floored that we have so many participants with just a little bit of advertising. This is coordinated with over 50 dialogues happening simultaneously throughout the United States. And there's even some other countries who are doing this right now as well. And here's just the climate action sponsors. I did want to point out that you might want to check out this YouTube video, Solve Climate with Evan Goodstein. He is the main organizer of this event for the country. So we are the organizers in West Virginia, but it was really he was the one who was putting it together. And so there's a nice YouTube video about why we're doing this as a nation. And he's encouraging people to use this hashtag #MakeClimateAClass, which I could not agree with more. So just a bit about me. I'm a physics and astronomy professor at WVU. I already mentioned how I'm a founder of the WVU Climate Action. I'm also the director of the planetarium at WVU, if you've been there. And I just do a lot of education and outreach. That's my main job. Rather than doing scientific research, I focus on education. So so my talk is a little different than the others in that it's really about empowering people to use their voice. I do that through teacher professional development, different educational platforms like in my astronomy class or in other special topics classes I've taught, and then encouraging just my community and citizens to engage in civic engagement. So I just want to talk a little bit about some examples. I mentioned climate action already. If you just go to our website, wvclimateaction.org, this is our grassroots group. We're trying to keep track of climate actions that are happening around the state. One of the things we identified kind of last fall, we just started in fall 2019 to kind of rally around the global climate strikes that were September 20th of 2019. We're gearing up to do events again for the 50th anniversary of Earth Day that's coming up. The 50th anniversary of Earth Day is April 22nd. The next global climate strike is April 24th. So if you're doing anything in honor of this, we would like to know about it so that we can learn from each other and kind of rally each other. So it might look very different for each one of us. Maybe all you can do that week is like wear green, and that would count as a climate action. Maybe you would encourage your kids to draw Earth-themed drawings on your sidewalk with chalk. for their neighbors to see. So there is no action that is too small. We just want people to take action, or maybe it's something very organized and you schedule like a whole virtual conversation with your town, kind of like we're trying to do right now. And this is really motivated, the strategy of doing something, literally anything, is really motivated by this TED Talk by Kathryn that was particularly impactful to me personally. For a long time, I felt like, oh, my background is in astronomy and physics. It's not earth science, right? It's not directly addressing climate change in that way. But I felt so frustrated, like, what can I do? What can I do? And this suddenly opened up the floodgates for, I can talk, I can keep talking about it. I can tell my representatives, I can tell my family members, my neighbors. And as Kathryn says, if we're not talking about it, why would we care? And if we don't care, why would we act? And to me, that's just crystal clear of literally anything, any action you can take is significant if you're talking about it, if you're taking time and attention in your consciousness for this issue. Another thing that really inspires me to again talk about it is some of the results from the Yale climate opinion maps. Yale University does these studies. They've done a few of them. One in there's 2016, and then the most recent was 2019. And I really encourage you to go to the website. It's incredibly interactive. You can see what your county in particular thinks about climate change in every regard. So I pulled this screenshot up in particular because you can see it says, how many adults in West Virginia discuss global warming at least occasionally? And you can see, oops, sorry, by the blue color that it's far less than 50%. And so again, like this particular statistic really stands out to me. So again, there's a lot more drop-down menus and things you can click on to play around with this website. So I highly encourage that. February 29th, another thing I did was I hosted a teacher professional development workshop. This was supported by a small grant that I wrote through the West Virginia Space Grant Consortium. So it was just 11 teachers, but 11 teachers each have many students. So this was our pilot workshop, February 29th. And there's a major citizen science component using the Globe Observer app where you can take data just around your house. This is a great thing to do during quarantine to actually contribute citizen science data. And we have submitted a grant for next year to expand that will span not only science fair, but social studies fair. One of the activities we really encourage teachers to do is writing a position statement as well. So there's a whole bunch of citizen climate lesson plans that, again, if we're using that hashtag make climate the class, there's just some really great ways that you can empower students to use their voice, which I think student voices are some of the most powerful voices. They're just very pure, and kids really don't understand why adults haven't paid attention to this. And I think if you can kind of give students that platform, give kids that platform to say that, people listen. And so I think mobilizing students is one of the most powerful things we can do. Another way you can do that, if you're an educator or parent, or if you know anyone in school, you can request for the West Virginia Science Public Outreach Team to come and visit. Obviously, when school's back in session, they can come in person, but they are starting online visits right now. That's wvspot.org. And so it's college ambassadors who are trained to talk about science, talk about water quality, talk about climate change with students around West Virginia, reaching about 5,000 students a year. Another project I did was at WVU with some honors. I just taught an honors book club, a 1-credit course last semester, and each of my students made a podcast episode. This is available on all major podcast platforms. If you listen to podcasts, just search WVU Climate Conversations and you can see each student's episode. So just kind of listen to that, while you're out gardening or walking. Again, a really good thing to do in quarantine. and let me know what you think. We're trying to get the word out on that. And then in February 17th, I mobilized a team of WVU students and faculty with the help of Evan Hansen to go down to the state capitol and show, hey, WVU is here to talk about climate change. And we hosted a series of activities for legislators and just showed our presence. Again, I feel like a lot of people hesitate of like, I don't know what to do, I don't know what to say, but just showing up and being present and showing that you care is actually really powerful. And that that really, I know Evan was already saying that, but really our decision makers aren't hearing from us. So I think that will be my main recommendation for our climate action is to speak out. And with that, I will stop. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much to all the speakers. That was really informative. I got a lot out of it myself, and I see there's questions rolling in. So I'm gonna try to unmute all the speakers and start reading off some of these really interesting questions. Most of them appear to be sort of directed generally, but I think I'll ask Robert Duval this question. So we've been forced to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic in very unprecedented ways. Before we forget what we are capable of, what lessons might we learn from this that could be applicable to our current climate change emergency? Oh, you need to unmute yourself, I think, Robert.
I know what, is that better?
Yes.
I did that to myself. Okay. That we can act in concert, that we can basically, for appropriately large enough societal goals, we can join together and act in ways that can actually save us. I've been very pleased with the response I've seen from the majority of people, and I think it will actually continue to grow because it's showing that it's working. So yeah, people can pull together. That's a very positive message. It's in the middle of a very unfortunate and tragic one.
Yeah, thank you so much. And at any point, if any of the other speakers want to chime in with additional answers, please go ahead and do that. We have another great question from Christina. She asks about what the current dialogue for policy and economic development opportunities there are around carbon capture in West Virginia. This is a question I have myself. So I think I'll direct it to Evan and then maybe to Jamie. So whether those carbon capture strategies are through land reclamation projects, soil carbon capture, or carbon capture technologies.
Well, I haven't heard that much about it at the legislature. You do hear about carbon capture and storage as a way to potentially adjust the carbon dioxide emissions from coal-fired power plants. And there's been talk of that for many years now. But I'm not convinced that's ever going to be economic at a level that would actually help adjust climate change. It's nowhere near economic now. It just adds costs and inefficiencies to coal-fired power plants. So I think if there's going to be many millions of dollars spent on addressing carbon pollution, the better place to spend that money is improving renewable energy technologies and battery storage or any type of storage technologies to allow us to transition and diversify the energy mix.
Can I maybe clarify the question though? And there's some other suggestions here about land reclamation projects and soil carbon capture. And I would add actually improved forest management techniques might actually be scalable in this state. So is there any discussion of that, or?
I haven't heard discussion of that at the legislature. So if these are approaches that can work, which it sounds like they are, and that they can work in West Virginia, and especially if there's a way to monetize them so that farmers or landowners or others can benefit from implementing some of these practices, you know, that would go a long way toward helping make sure they get adopted.
Good.
Jamie, did you have anything you wanted to comment on with respect to that question? Need to unmute you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Evan said about carbon capture and sequestration with respect to coal. Coal is already uneconomic as a means of generating electricity, and adding the cost of carbon capture and sequestration doesn't make the economics any better. And I think Evan hit on something that I would also point to as well in terms of monetizing. And Jim Probst, you're probably glad to hear this. We need to put a price on carbon. I mean, I think we need to send a signal to folks that if you were going to cut down a tree, it's a carbon sink. And if we can pay you to not cut down your tree and preserve that as a carbon sink, or soil management practice or forest management practices, I think those can all be compensated, but you've got to have a mechanism that recognizes the value of carbon reduction. And so we have some pretty sophisticated carbon markets that were getting developed, you know, probably a decade ago. And they just sort of collapsed. But I think people can get very creative and innovate if they have the economic incentive to do so, and putting a price on carbon would do that, compensate the people for taking actions that are going to reduce carbon or capture carbon emissions.
Okay, thank you.
Can I add a little tidbit on carbon capture and storage? I've been a skeptic of it for a long time due to some simple back of the envelope calculations. And that's that if you burn carbon, and coal is almost pure carbon, not quite pure, but close to it, the tonnage of carbon dioxide you produce for it is approximately 3 times the tonnage of coal you burn. If you capture it by turning it into calcium carbonate, it's almost 5 times the tonnage. So if we burn 250 million tons of coal a year, where are we going to store 750 million to 1 billion 250 million tons of either CO2 or calcium carbonate? And the logistics don't work. I mean, the idea is there, and you can no doubt capture some. And I would still research it because I'd be delighted to be wrong. The most viable means I've heard of storing it is as a hydraulic fracking fluid, which is a whole nother set of questions. And so I think that it's a nice idea, but it will not prove to be a salvation in any sense.
Yeah, and there has been, as far as I know, no successful scalable solution there. Okay, here's another really interesting question from Jonah Cohn. This is a state that has historically leaned heavily Democratic, largely due to labor issues, but has recently trended more to the right, in part due to collective growing pains around coal. How can we tie in labor issues to the discussion about climate change and environmental justice and use that to mobilize marginalized groups around climate policy? So I think I will send that to Evan. And maybe
sure. Well,
next
there's lots.
So first Evan, then Kathryn.
Yeah, there's lots of jobs that come along with diversifying the energy mix. There's thousands of solar-related jobs in neighboring states, and we have just a few hundred here. So the best way to bring the labor unions and the environmental movement together is to talk about those jobs and to make them union jobs, good-paying union jobs. And they can be. You know, there's a delegate in the House of Delegates right now who's a union electrician, and he spent some time up in Massachusetts installing utility scale solar up in Massachusetts. So he's sort of an ambassador for the possibility of good paying union jobs in the renewable sector. And it's going to take time. You know, I introduced a bill that we were calling the Just Transition Bill that deals with some of these issues, or at least starts to deal with some of these issues. It would require the state to create a just transition office and then to draft a just transition plan to figure out how we could draw more resources and money into communities that are so dependent on coal right now. And the unions need to play a role in that drafting of the plan and coming up with ideas for what can work best to diversify those economies and make jobs available that people in West Virginia have skills that they can, you know, fulfill those jobs. So I think you're right on point, especially in West Virginia. If we could unify the unions and the environmental movement, that'd be very powerful. And I would note that the unions, like the UMWA, did support that just transition bill. So I think that was a milestone, just getting their support for that.
That's great. Now, I pitched this also to Kathryn because I think, Kathryn, you have a lot of exposure to people from across the state in your outreach efforts. So I was wondering if you had some thoughts on that topic as well.
Thanks. Yeah, I do have some thoughts. And I mean, it kind of comes back to talk about it, talk about it, talk about it. I think there's a lot of just messaging that happens in West Virginia in general about like what kind of education we have and what kind of jobs we have and what kind of opportunities we have. I do see that a lot with my students, in particular at WVU, in particular first generation college students. I think one of the, and I just kind of go back to the target audience I work with of like, you know, even some high school students, right? Thinking about is college right for them or not? And thinking about what it really means to, or what your job possibilities are in West Virginia. So I guess, you know, I kind of go back to mobilizing the youth and really targeting the youth for that messaging because they're the ones who are going to live that. And they're the ones who are making their opinions right now. So that would be the audience that I would target for that messaging.
Mm-hmm. And so a follow-on question sort of related to all of this is what kinds of new, from Bree or Bry Clark, what type of new training or education would be needed to work for a more energy efficient setting compared to coal mining? So is there changes in our education and the emphasis we have in education in the state that might support a just transition? Oh, we got to unmute you.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of economic data to suggest that STEM professions are very promising. And, you know, when we hear STEM, so that's science, technology, engineering, and math, when we hear that, we think, oh, you need some advanced degree, you have to be like a PhD scientist to do meaningful work in these areas, and that's not necessarily true. I think a lot of encouragement could be given to students that are thinking about going to community colleges and getting some technical skills. But I do think focusing on STEM, so that science, technology, engineering, and math fields, is going to be our best bet for having a trained population of workers who can think critically and solve problems that haven't even come up yet, right? Like that's what all of our future most of the future jobs of the future haven't even been invented yet. And so if you're trying to prepare for those jobs, you need to be prepared to be a problem solver rather than to have one specific skill. And that's what STEM careers really teach you, is that critical thinking skills to be a problem solver and handle issues as they arise.
Okay, I think Thank you so much, Kathryn, for that answer. We're sort of pushing the limit of the time that we had allocated for this. So I think I'd like to unmute everybody, if I can manage that, and give everyone a chance to say hello. And to thank our speakers. Thank you so much, Dr. Van Nostrand, Delegate Evan Hansen, Kathryn Williamson, Robert Duval. Really appreciate
Happy to
Kathryn
hear that there were no friendships that were lost along the way.
everybody organizing this event. So thank you so much. And we
I don't think that you were wrong to react the way you did, though. So I wouldn't think too much on that. I think you were right, because I mean,
Thank
you know,
you.
Rachel
Bye.
is just.
Share.